have to be able to project everywhere. It's a great opportunity for me to be able to come and talk to you. You know, when I look out among you, I see a lot of people I know. I'm also probably seeing a lot of people who may have memories of going out to Thompson Park. And then surprisingly, I also meet people who go, Thompson Park? Just Thompson Park, never heard of it. So hopefully for some of you, this might be a little bit of a trip down memory lane. For others, it might be an introduction into Thompson Park, and we'll have a little bit of fun. I'm a very informal person. I just got back yesterday from the East Coast, so I'm just having to run through this. So I've got some pictures, got some fun history. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jocelyn Dodge, and I've been with the Beaverhead-Deerlodge National Forest for about the last 26 years. I've had the opportunity to be able to be here my entire time with the Forest Service managing the recreation program for the Butte, and then it was the Jefferson Ranger districts, and now I've also taken on the Fiddler Ranger districts. So, as I like to tell people now, I've got the whole Deer Lodge in my hands. About 1.2 million acres. And one of the things that was really exciting for me when I first came to Butte was to learn about Thompson Park. And my very first district ranger and I, Margie Ewing, said, you know, we really want to work on Thompson Park and be able to bring it back to what it once was. Because by the time I came here in 1991, there really wasn't a lot going on with Thompson Park. You know, it had kind of been a party spot. It had become filled with trash. A lot of the facilities had degraded down, and a lot of roads were eroding. And so we really started to work with Butte-Silver Bow back in '91 and trying to work with Thompson Park. And the more I got involved with it, the more I just, it became my baby. And I now live about 2 miles from Thompson Park, so it's my backyard as well. Just a little bit quick about me. I was just telling somebody that when I first moved here, I'm a New Englander. I came out here to school in 1977 to Missoula and graduated with a recreation management degree. And I worked with city and county parks and recreation departments in Missoula and then Flathead County before coming to work with the Forest Service. Now my mother's from New York City. And one of the things that my grandmother told me about when she knew I was moving to Butte was, well, we have a cousin that was William Clark's family physician. Now, he never came to Butte, but he used to go play cards with William Clark when he came to New York. Well, my aunt was doing some research on the family, and she called me up one day and she said, you've got to go look up 1948, March, I forgot the date, because somehow this doctor died here in Butte. So I came up to the archives, and lo and behold, not only did we find out that he died here in Butte, but Dr. Sam Schwartz was a practicing physician here for 50 years. So Bob Leipheimer happened to hear this story, and I was talking to him one day, and he called up, and lo and behold, this was the doctor that he delivered him. And so he said to me, this makes you a Butte girl. And you too. Oh, okay. Dr. Schwartz. So he, Bob said I was. Oh, well. I will try to make it. Anyway, he's buried here in Butte. He worked over at the St. James Medical Center. So I do have some history coming from the East Coast. So again, it's been kind of fun to see this whole thing come around. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a history on Thompson Park, and I've already had someone who gave me another article about Thompson Park. Always searching for stories and pictures about Thompson Park, because unfortunately one of the things that happened with Butte-Silver Bow was they had a flood, and many of their records were lost in a flood because they hadn't, Jim, I can't remember when that happened. Jim used to work for Parks and Recreation. I do have some materials, but it's always nice to be able to add to that collection. When we opened up Thompson Park, we actually had a 90-year-old said, I came and I worked on Thompson Park when it was first being built by the WPA. We didn't get his name, unfortunately, which was, would have been really exciting to have.
1908.
What's that?
1908.
1908?
The big flood.
Okay. So anyway, we're going to talk about Thompson Park. And before even Thompson Park came to be, as many might be aware, this is an excerpt from the Career Spots, is that the 9 Mile area was already a unique recreation destination area for many of Butte's residents. Lake Alvoca was out there, and there were cottages, there were little yacht clubs out there, And it was really a great destination spot for summer recreation for the city of Butte before Thompson Park came about. And part of that also has to do with the 9 Mile House. The 9 Mile House is associated with William Boyce Thompson and the Hicks family, all part of the old Copper Kings. And they originally built the 9 Mile House as part of their summer cottages. In fact, there's a friend of mine who lives in one of William Clark's little hunting cabins right behind the 9 Mile Park. But there was a small lake that was built out there. It was a man-made lake. There's still some remnants of the weir that is over there across the street. And for many years, it was a dance hall, it was a community center, and then it eventually was torn down and the city of Butte made it into a park. But this was one man's legacy, the beginnings of Thompson Park. And William Boyce Thompson was a Montanan. He was born down in Alder, came up to Butte when he was about 10 years old, and was raised here within the mines. And he went to New York, he went east to get his education, and he came back and he married Gertrude Hickman from Virginia City. And he went on to become quite a mining magnate. He was part of the financial world with the Guggenheims in New York City, and eventually started Newmont Mining. And Newmont Mining was named for both New York and Montana connections that he had. And still today, Newmont Mining is one of the largest mining companies in the world, thanks to William Boyce Thompson. He did die very early. He actually probably never saw the beginnings of Thompson Park, but he had this legacy that he felt that the city of Butte needed a park. There were not enough green spaces. So there were a series of placer claims that he owned along Blacktail Creek. If you start at the 9 Mile, and then as you head up towards Roosevelt Drive, and then also head up through the heart of Thompson Park, he donated those claims to the city of Butte to be used for a park. Now when the city fathers got together, it was in 1915, there was a motion to name the park after his father, William Thompson, who was the mayor of Butte in 1895 to 1897. And I do have an article about his father here. And so the council decided to name the park in the honor of his father. And one of the councilmen, you can see the quote that he talked about this park, is that the new park would be a gateway to Butte that will command the admiration of everyone who passes through. So people had quite a big plan for it, but the unfortunate part was when you think about placer claims that are about 200 feet by 600 feet, there's not much you can do, particularly because Blacktail Creek ran alongside it, and the old Highway 2 also ran alongside it, so there really wasn't much that they could do. So they came to the National Forest, the Deerlodge Forest, and said, we have this property, we want to buy some more land from you so that we can make it into a park. Well, the National Forest does not sell public land down there, at least at that time they didn't. So Butte being Butte, and the power that it had back in its heyday, their congressman went to Washington, and in 1922, there was an act passed that created a municipal recreation area for the purposes of recreation for the city of Butte. It's about 3,500 acres. It is segregated out, and afterwards you can take a look at this map. It's a very odd shape, and one of the things that we've never been able to figure out is how it got its shape. I've got a lot of the old letters that were going on between the city of Butte, the Forest Service, and the Secretary of Agriculture about how this boundary came to be, and no one really knows, and it might be in some of the old papers that were lost. But the placer claims that I talk about run along Highway 2, and they segregated all the way up to the top of Pipestone Pass. And then they also took a chunk that runs along the creek over towards Herman Gulch. So if you go to the end of Roosevelt Drive, right before it drops down into what we call Herman Gulch, that was also the boundary of the park in there. Now another one of the unique things about the act and the agreement that came from it, which what it did was to lay out what are the responsibilities of the Forest Service and what were the responsibilities of the city of Butte. And for the primary purpose of recreation, that fell to the city of Butte with oversight by the Forest Service, and the Forest Service continued on its responsibilities of fire protection, timber management, but no mining. It was protected through minerals protection. You cannot do any type of mining or mining exploration in Thompson Park. So it is a fully protected area in which essentially no development could occur on that. What's really unique about the agreement is that it was signed by the Secretary of Agriculture and the Mayor of Butte. You don't have agreements that are signed like that. So in itself, the agreement, the act itself was very unique. It's the only set-aside congressionally designated municipal recreation area within the Forest Service system, but also you have an agreement that was signed by a mayor and a Secretary of Agriculture. It's another unique piece to the whole story. William Thompson also set aside some money into a trust fund that was to be used to develop and start landscaping plans and what did we want this park to look like. And one of the products of that is this wonderful survey map that was completed in 1939. They went back and forth for many years to make some decisions about what should be in the park, but they also first had to lay out what was there. And what's really unique about this, and there's some old pictures of some of the things within Thompson Park, they name things like, they named the canyon, Sunshine Canyon or Grand Canyon. They have one area called Lone Tree. If you've been down to the Lower Eagle's Nest, there's one great big pine tree, and then that was where it was called. And when I got to naming all of these sites, I really couldn't name it Lone Tree because of the fact we have way too many trees there. They have places like a balanced rock. They would name where there was Douglas fir or lodgepole. So it's a very unique survey, something that is to the detailed point that you just don't see anymore. And they had started to lay out where trails and roads and other facilities that they wanted to go in it. That was all funded initially from this fund that was set aside by William Boyce Thompson. Now the other thing about William Boyce Thompson is that this isn't the only type of philanthropy that he engaged in. He was part of the Hickman Library over in Virginia City. He also, his Family Legacy Foundation still supports an arboretum in Phoenix, Arizona. And there was a botanical research facility in Ithaca, New York that he also began. That is no longer running. But those were all some of the legacies of Thompson and his wife Gertrude. So the vision, they had quite a grandiose vision, and you're going to see a lot of that on this survey. They wanted roads, they wanted trails, they wanted campgrounds. They also wanted an amphitheater. And the amphitheater was located where the trestle is on Roosevelt Drive. There's a big open area over there, and that area was going to be designated as an amphitheater. They also had visions of a winter sports area. They were going to have an ice rink. They actually did build a ski jump. There are 2 ski jumps. So if you've gone up Highway 2 to where the archery range now is located, their practice range shoots into the ski jumps. And so those ski jumps were used for many years. Then it became a motorcycle hill climb area, and it's been permitted since the 1970s as part of the archery range that the Silver Bow Archers manage. And it's the only permit that we have within the park area. So the big question began, well, how do you build it? And where do you build it at all of these facilities? And how are we going to get the money for it? Well, one of the things that it sat for about 10 or 15 years with no development. And I do have some correspondence back and forth between the city of Butte and the Forest Service, concerned because nothing was happening, and concerned that it was just getting, dumped on, and there was garbage out there, and it was questionable whether or not Butte was going to continue on with this agreement, because at that time, during the late 20s, still trying to get their plans going, what did they want to do with it? So during the 1930s, the Work Progress Administration actually was the entity that started to build the facilities within Thompson Park. Another unique piece of it, because typically it was the Civilian Conservation Corps that built roads and trails. Birch Creek is one of the facilities that we had here. But in this case, there was, from the letters that I had from years ago, there was kind of some question about whether Butte could really take this on and would they really carry through with the plans. So they really didn't want to leave it to Butte. They gave it to the Department of Interior to be responsible for administering the WPA and all of the projects that were going to go on in there. And I do have a lot of the old planning documents that were going back and forth that talk about this map in relation to what they wanted to see in there. But one of the first things that had to be done was to clean out the park. In the 1900s, early 1900s, yes, we had another episode of mountain pine beetle. And one of the things that I found in the documents, in the planning documents, is that they wanted all the stumps and all the trees that were hit by beetles and brush removed from the Thompson Park area. So what's really unique about Thompson Park is there's not a lot of old stumps and downfall. There are some remnants of some of the old mining and log work that was done when Butte was supported so much by the nearby forests. But it was pretty well cleaned out. Wherever they had developed sites, picnic areas, campgrounds, they had all of the stumps removed. They had all of the large trees removed. In fact, one of the things that the Forest Service did is on Rampart Mountain, they thought one way to get rid of mountain pine beetle was to stack it and burn it. So there are some old photos of log decks on Rampart that were burned to get rid of the mountain pine beetle. Unfortunately, it's come through. I will not be removing stumps and old trees in Thompson Park now. It's going to be a little bit too hard. But it was pretty unique, and I have a lot of letters going back and forth. I have one document that I found, and I brought some things here that talked about the man hours that they thought it was going to take to be able to do the work, and it was done in 1933. But at the time, they were estimating about 20,000 hours of labor to be able to work to construct bridges and trails and footbridges and culverts and fountains and toilets. I have the old designs that were used for fire pits and for some of the toilets that are in there, so that's some of the archival stuff that we still have. At the time, the price tag for this was estimated to be about $250,000, which would put that well over a $2 million mark in today's money on that one. But we had over 250 workers from the WPA that were working on this in the 1930s to be able to do the primary work. And if you've ever been in the archery range, there's an old road that goes up there, you can still see some of the beautiful stonework that was done for culverts and drain crossings. It's really pretty. The roads to this day, you can still see where most of the roads were, and that's part of what we used to be able to develop the whole trail system, was taking a lot of these old roads that were built by the WPA, which were abandoned both by Butte-Silver Bow and the Forest Service. When I even came here in '91, we were closing off areas because of some of the erosion and off-road work that was going on. But it's not the only group, the WPA, that worked in Thompson Park. One of the things about Thompson Park is the legacy of the volunteers who worked to develop the park. Obviously the WPA workers were not getting paid for such, they were given to learn a trade. But we had the Boy Scouts, we had the Kiwanis Club, we had the Lions Club that were involved with the development of Thompson Park. And each little group had something that they wanted to do within there. And one of the things that was developed was 2 different spring developments on Harding Way at each of the hairpin turns. And it was thought at that point, geez, it would be really great to be able to provide some water. And one of my employees, Frank Beavis, can remember going up there to go get fresh water. You also needed that water to be able to get up and over the pass in the Model T, so it had a variety of purposes. So as you're going up the very first hairpin turn, that spring development actually occurred on the other side, on the left-hand side of the highway as you're going up, piped underneath the highway, and then that spring development, it looks like kind of a shrine per se. It was painted white. And then the other spring development is on the second hairpin turn, That development was done just up the hill, and a little creek that came down and then piped into that fountain. And we're going to be interpreting those so people know. Because people are always asking me, well, who died up there? What are these shrines up there for? And they're actually water fountains on that one. So what we ended up doing, the Ma Bell also had a hand in this, but a permit was actually given to the Kiwanis Club to be able to develop and maintain those water fountains on that. It hasn't been maintained and developed for decades, even before I came here. There was one woman here in Butte who, and there was a newspaper article a few years ago that she was going up and painting it. We couldn't figure out what was going on, and she put flowers and just decorated up every year, which we didn't like that part of it, but at least keeping them white makes it look good on that. It makes it look like they're being taken care of. So this history of volunteerism is pretty amazing, and one of the neat stories that we get to continue today is the work with the Boy Scouts. I've been very fortunate over about the past 5 or 6 years to be able to start working with a lot of Eagle Scout candidates. And several of them have taken on projects within Thompson Park, which continues the legacy of volunteerism within Thompson Park to see it get developed. And back in the 1930s, they worked to build some bridges. A lot of what you see in Thompson Park in the rehabilitation project was right after the designs that from the WPA era and with what the Boy Scouts did. So we really wanted to maintain that legacy of what was there beforehand and give people a sense of history and what it might have looked like at that point. So over the years, and there was another stint, so after the 1930s, it got used, but it really wasn't being well maintained. We continue on with letters between Butte-Silver Bow and the Forest Service about the need to do better maintenance, and I don't have a lot of information about how well it might be used, but in talking to people, when we began the rehabilitation project in 2007, I remember going out there as a kid. We used to take a basket of fried chicken and potato salad, and we'd all go out there as a family, and we'd go out there and picnic. And I've talked to a lot of people who have those kind of memories about going out there. So we know it was getting used, but we also know that there was a lot of things getting dumped. In fact, one year in the early 1990s, we did do some clearing of mountain pine beetle around the recreation sites and the roadways, and we went up on top of the ridge up above Lower Eagle's Nest and found some of these rusty remnants of the old, part of the biplane, some of the rides from the Columbia Gardens up there. And there's dumps of tin cans up there, so it really became a dumping spot. And the Forest Service in the 1970s was writing to the Butte-Silver Bow going, you need to take better care of this. And Jim, I'm sure you might have stories going out there. But the other resurrection of facilities out there occurred in the 1960s with the neighborhood youth program. And they went, and I've got a couple pictures, and Jim even recognized a couple of folks from the pictures. They went out there, and it was kind of the hoods in the woods type of a program because of going through community service or their low income. They take the kids out there, and they did a lot of rebuilding the facilities out there, which had two purposes. One, being able to rehabilitate some of the picnic areas and the campgrounds so they could be used again, but also those kids who were doing all the work kind of were watching out for it, because if their friends wanted to go out and have a good time and do some vandalism, they're like, no, this is my part, I did this, don't ruin the work I did. So there was some ownership that was developed into it, which is why I like to work with so many of the Boy Scouts and any of the other youth groups. Exchange Club has been out there to assist us, is it gets you some ownership into that park and being able to maintain it, because it's our new legacy for this community, and there's a lot of people who've put a lot of work into it and see the value. But in 2004, when the Natural Resource Damage Program was looking at grants, there was a desire to be able to look at Thompson Park, to be able to resurrect it, do some rehabilitation, and we worked with the county to quickly put together a proposal to rehabilitate the park. The First time we went for the grants, we were turned down because in 2004, the advisory committee was not quite sure that the Forest Service and the county, Butte-Silver Bow, really were going to make a commitment to the park. There was a feeling that this is Forest Service ground, why isn't the Forest Service doing this work? This is their job. And there were several people who were not in favor of funding this project because of the fact that it was on the National Forest. So while it might be a segregated park for the purposes of recreation for the city of Butte, it's still the ownership lies with the Forest Service, and the partnership for management is with Butte-Silver Bow. So we were turned down the first time. In 2007, we again were told, you know what, the time is ripe. Let's go for this again. It was just after Milltown had been approved. There were some other recreation projects that had been approved, and we were encouraged to again try to apply for a grant. We had a little bit more time to be able to put into the planning effort and be able to show the time between 2004 and 2007 that we were really serious about wanting to manage it and make a commitment to it. We began working with getting gates put up so that we could close the park at night. We put out an order that said that you couldn't have any fires, open fires in there. You couldn't do any hunting in there. You know, again, we're talking about it's a city park. It is on the city park directory. And we wanted to start managing it, and we needed to be able to show the Natural Resource Damage Program advisory and trustees that we were all serious about this. So we were very fortunate that we were approved for a grant. It was just under $1 million, and it was partnered in with money that we received for, from the Recreation Trails Program, grant program to be able to rehabilitate trails. I had received some money from the Rails to Trails Conservancy to be able to look at the railroad trail in there, because then one of the things we'll talk about in just a moment is the Milwaukee Railroad, or as it's more known as the Milwaukee Road. And within the park boundary, there are 2 tunnels and a trestle that when the Milwaukee, Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul went out in bankruptcy in the 1980s, all of that reverted back to the Forest Service, and we actually went and looked at the tunnels and closed them all because they needed work. We closed the trestle because it was unsafe, and there's actually a 3rd tunnel on top of Pipestone Pass that runs under Highway 2. So together with a lot of partnership money, we actually turned that $1 million grant from the NRD into about a $2 million grant that went in to do a lot of rehabilitation work in the park area. And the 2 things that we were working on was to restore fish and wildlife habitats and to replace lost recreation services. Again, it relied on volunteers to be working on this, which was the other part of the match, was to continue that volunteer legacy of the park. So one of the big things that we really wanted to work on was stream restoration. As I said, part of the claims and in the park runs along Blacktail Creek. Blacktail Creek is known for west slope cutthroat trout, within the Forest Service is a sensitive species, and that habitat is something we want to protect. The old road going into the Eagle's Nest had culverts, and those culverts were not functioning properly. The roads that were built in there were native surface. They were built just going in there without any drainage, and we're dumping a lot of sediment into the creek. And for fish to be able to survive in a creek with sediment is very difficult. So one of the things that we had in the grant was to replace culverts with bridges. So the nice bridges that you see off of Highway 2 were all paid for as part of the grant. One of the first things that we did. We also did a lot of work with culverts to be able to trap that sediment before it came down into these areas, because our whole idea was to protect all those waters that come into Blacktail Creek. Blacktail Creek runs all the way up to the Continental Divide at the top of Lime Kiln. So the Forest Service, years prior, in the 1990s, had done some work beyond where the houses are up above Lime Kiln. This was a continuation of all of that work. So we had a contract, we had a design, we worked with Butte-Silver Bow and Forest Service engineers. That road has now been regraded, it's been gravelled, and all of the ditches lined and new culverts put in there to be able to control and trap all that sediment before it gets down to the creek. We also had to reconfigure up around Sagebrush Flats, and I don't know how many people have been up there since we've remodeled it and looking at it, but the old Sagebrush Flats was, I don't know, the campground was down below where the host site is, where our trailhead is, and the upper there, they had some tables, but there was kind of an old road. My understanding, it was used by the National Guard as an obstacle course, so a lot of the mounds that you see are really old bunkers that were put in by the National Guard to be able to hold their exercises out there. So we had quite a bit of regrading and redesign to go. And one of the things that we did is we pulled together a public group between 2004 and 2007 to have them, the public, tell us what they wanted to see in that park. And that information was used to develop the second grant as well as all the final plans. So one of the things that people said is they wanted group picnic areas, they wanted individual sites, they wanted trailhead access, they wanted loop connections for trails, and also we wanted to look at developing the Milwaukee Road further on that one. And fortunately, we were able to build most of the things with the exception of the group area up at Sagebrush Flats. So that's still a dream, still in the plans on the horizon, but we were able to get all of the other features constructed within there. The Forest Service ended up coming up with some capital investment dollars, so we ended up providing about $300,000 from our recreation program for the regional office to be able to work on the development of this park as well. The other thing that we wanted to do was to work on trails. We now have about 25 miles of non-motorized trails that run through the park that have become really popular for hiking, mountain biking, and horseback riding. And what we tried to do, I actually used to start riding in there in the mid-90s, and Pete Madison and Daryl McDaniel would take me through there, and I'd get lost and let the horses bring me home when I was out riding by myself. But we tried to utilize a lot of the trails that people were using. We used some of the old road prisms that we found within there. John's Gulch has actually done almost all on an old road prism that was built to be able to access the Milwaukee Road. And we then made whatever connections, or we had to do some reconstruction or relocation of those trails. So again, it reduces the sediment, we can provide for long-term maintenance. And almost all of the 25 miles of trails was built or rebuilt with volunteer labor, either from the Montana Conservation Corps or from the AmeriCorps St. Louis, which is a group which has come out here since 2000 to work with trails for me. And they have also then continued on the clearing. This is actually a piece of trail that where the archery range, we needed to stay away from the archery range. Arrows can be a little dangerous for people when they're flying, particularly gun horses. And so what we did was to build a trail connection across the ski jump that's up above the practice area to be able to get around the permit boundary for the archery range. And that was constructed with the AmeriCorps and the Montana Conservation Corps. And so it's kind of fun, I ride my horse across, and you kind of look down, you can see people practicing, and they're kind of looking up going, well, this is kind of strange. And we are out of arrow shot. I had to make sure on that one as well. So it is a fun little trail. It's a great trail going on up through there, and it will lead over to the east side of Thompson Park. What's also really unique about this is that we now have connections in with the Continental Divide National Scenic Trail, and that was very important for us. So not only does the Milwaukee Road function as the backbone for all of the trails within Thompson Park, but we have other trails that not only lead back to the railroad, but we have other trails that lead up to the Continental Divide, either via the Beaver Ponds, Blacktail Ridge, and you can do loops. We connect into Roosevelt Drive, where we do have one motorized trail, the Herman Gulch Trail, that now provides a better access so that people can take their ATVs and dirt bikes, come down Herman Gulch, go over the Basin Creek Park, up through Bear Gulch Trail, which has also been redone, and you can ride around the highlands and come back down and do a whole host of loops. So we do offer a variety of opportunities there. In fact, we're going to be meeting with Butte-Silver Bow with how to potentially connect over with Basin Creek Park and some plans that the county has to rehabilitate the reservoir, which was another destination for Butte residents. back in the early 1900s. So we have some very unique opportunities for our Butte area. But being able to connect in the Continental Divide was very important for us. So a lot of times we also had to protect all of the historic features. And sometimes took a little bit of work, a little bit of engineering. This is the Grand Canyon Trail, which takes off right across the entrance to the archery range. And the ditch that you see over here is part of an old ditch works that were used during the placer mining days to be able to bring water for the placer mining that occurred there prior to Thompson Park being designated. And because they are so old, they become a historic feature. So we had a requirement through the Forest Service process and the Montana State Historic Preservation Office to be able to protect those features. So in some cases, we had to get pretty elaborate in what we had to do to protect those areas. And this was actually a design by one of our AmeriCorps volunteers who was an engineer and then built by them as well. And then in some cases, we were able to get someone from Lewis and Clark Forest come down a little mini excavator machine and be able to help us with some of the trail building. And the tunnel restoration was really important. And we had to fight for this one because there was really a question about why we really needed to utilize the tunnels and why couldn't we just put a trail around there. And there was concern that we were just doing something a little bit beyond what we really needed to meet the goal of replacing lost recreation opportunities. And so I had to go out there and I had to walk a bypass trail around there and be able to show through our questions and discussions with NRD group that it really was not as feasible. It would have been just as expensive on the second tunnel in there to build a trail around there. We would have been blasting rocks and it would have detracted from the natural landscape. And we wanted something that was accessible. And so we won that argument and we got it funded through some additional grants to the Recreation Trails Program that did an inspection of the tunnels, did a lot of bolting, and we had to do a little bit of repair work on the linings of the tunnel, but they are now open. My future plan is that I want to be able to light the tunnels, so it's a little bit safer for me and my horse to be able to run through there. I will not take her through the second tunnel, it's too long. I have a lot of pictures in here, so it takes a moment. Catch up.
I understand the AmeriCorps people call you mother.
No.
No, you don't, Jocelyn.
I call them my kids.
That's right.
Oh.
Big difference.
Yeah. So the other piece of Thompson Park was the interpretation. And we were really very fortunate. We worked with Tash Communications here in Butte and the Historic Preservation Officer here with Butte-Silver Bow and our roads, wildlife and fisheries. And we not only interpret the Milwaukee Road, but wildlife, fire, fish, the geology up there, and if you've not been up there to see these pictures, they're really wonderful. And again, the partnerships. The amount of partnerships that we have and are continuing to build in there, one of my goals is to be able to develop a Friends of Thompson Park, to be able to continue sustaining Thompson Park. All of our budgets are shrinking, and this is my baby. And I want to be able to create an opportunity that funding is not a reason why Thompson Park is not taken care of if the agencies are not able to fully be able to take care of it, so we don't go into disrepair in the future. So that's my story of Thompson Park. But the other parts of the story of Thompson Park are the fact that the Milwaukee Road, we have 4.5 miles of the old Milwaukee Road that run through Thompson Park. And that in itself is pretty cool because the Milwaukee Road through this section was part of 440 miles of an electrified system that ran through there. So if you've ever been up on the railroad, you see the old wires, there's still some of the old cable in the railroad bed. And it was thought, and it was a partnership with Thomas Edison to be able to provide an electric line that gets over the Rocky Mountains so that you had a little bit better economics and being able to continue your profits. And for the time, it was, but it also ended up being part of their demise because the cost to build this railroad was so high and their overhead was so high, they actually had gone into bankruptcy a couple times, the last time being in the 1980s, which then turned everything back to the Forest Service. I actually worked in Missoula for Parks and Recreation when we inherited part of the Continental, or the Milwaukee Road, known as the Kim Williams Trail, that goes out into East Missoula from Missoula, going down Hellgate Canyon. So as I said, within the park itself, we have 2 tunnels and a trestle, and then on top of Pipestone Pass, we have another tunnel within that area. And they each kind of get a little bit longer in progression. But one of the best known locomotives that operated in this whole area was known as the Little Joe. And the Little Joe was named because the railroad was going to, had a great big order to be able to sell all of these locomotives to Russia. Well, at the start of the Cold War, we said, we're not selling you our locomotives at all. And they kept them, and they put them online until about 1973, and they were known as the Little Joe on that, going through there. And the electric trains worked really slick, because as you were going downgrade, it would build up and store electricity in order to be able to go up the grade on that one, and thus saving them a lot of cost in fuel, because it was generating its own electricity to get up and down all the passes. So as I said, there are 3 tunnels. The tunnel up at the top is about almost a half a mile long, about 2,300 feet, fully lined, and it's the only one that's lined, and it was one of the most expensive tunnels that was built, even though it's not the longest one. Along the Hiawatha over in Idaho, they've got a tunnel that's a mile long. But because of the rock and all the sediments and everything that went into it, it became a very expensive tunnel. And I was watching a YouTube video, if you go Google, it's called Harlowtown to Butte, and it had the last 4 days of the Little Joe before they took the electric trains offline and replaced them with diesel trains. And you can watch that video as it comes up over the viaduct, coming up over through the Douglas Donald R. town site, up over Pipestone Pass, and then coming down through Thompson Park. And it said that a lot of the helper trains would actually stall out as it went through the tunnel because of the elevation being at 6,300 feet. The lack of oxygen would cause them to stall out coming through the tunnel. So the second tunnel, which are named second and third tunnels, Blacktail 1 and 2, the middle tunnel is 1,100 feet, and the one furthest to the west or to the north is 500 feet. That's the one I'll take my horse through. So I was able to find these wonderful pictures. One of the things about the interpretation signs that are up along the railroad is I found them, and they'd all come from Thompson Park. So this is the building of the tunnel up at top at Pipestone Pass. You can see where the old road came up above. The new road is actually comes up and around like this and then comes around. So this old road still exists down below, but it was really quite a feat to be able to see how tunnels were built on that. This is a picture of one of the other smaller tunnels and what it took to build these tunnels. And some great views. Some of these pictures are going to be used in some additional interpretation signs that we're going to be putting up this summer up along the railroad that continues the story of the Milwaukee Road. And it's a lot of fun. I was on the other day and trying to download a YouTube to show today was just going to be a little bit cumbersome, but it is fun. There are a couple of videos out there that you can see, even short 4-minute clips of watching the trains come through, the trestle. So this is just a picture inside, and if you go inside those tunnels, you can actually look at the concrete liners that were put in there in the forms. You can see the lumber forms that were used to there. But they did have problems with the miners. We're not liking to build tunnels. They like to do the mining, they like to do the tunnel mining, but they didn't care for doing the railroad mining as much. So this is the trestle, and what I found interesting is I never knew how they build trestles. Well, they have what's called the traveler, and the traveler would just inch along as they were building, and they actually were building the railroad from both east and west, so going from Chicago to Seattle. And this is coming up over Roosevelt Drive, This was where they were at one time looking at putting the amphitheater back in the 1930s. And here's a picture of a little Joe coming across the trestle over there. Kind of interesting. When we were getting the trestle redone, the contractor from Dillon, they all had to get strapped in, and he had a bobcat because there was actually railroad ballast put on the trestle, and we decided it would be better to take it off. And he did not like heights. It's about 150 feet up above Roosevelt Drive, and you get vertigo. Now, when we were first looking at this, and I take Dory Scoocroot up there and looking what we're going to do, and there were some old stanchions and stuff from the old power lines, and she was leaning on, going out like this. I'm like, Dory, get back. Oh, it's okay. So one of the things, I've got another grant to do for this summer, because when you're going over those railroad ties on a mountain bike, you're going, you know, kind of going over rumble strips. Well, I got a grant over the last 2 years, and working with volunteers, I will be placing running boards on one side of the trestle, so it'll be a little bit easier to use it. And this trestle gets used by everything. During the winter time, I've seen moose tracks up there, deer tracks up there, so everybody uses this trestle. It's got to catch up. These are really high. But you know, and it's kind of fun walking when you're walking across the trestle. You know, you can see over to the Continental Divide. You can hear Blacktail Creek coming below. How to control the kids and the partying at that point. Yeah. I just have to be patient, I know, with my clicker.
How high did you say the trestle was?
It's 150 feet and it's 660 feet long. Okay. The other unique thing about Thompson Park and the Milwaukee Road is that there were railroad camps in there. And the queer spots talked about, there's one in here that I have in building of the tunnel, and there were 3 railroad camps. And the railroad camps were named after the railroad bosses, Crook, Orman, and Grading. So when I got to name the new trails, I named the 3 trails that came off the railroad in honor of the railroad bosses. Again, bringing a little bit of history to that area. One of my goals is trying to figure out where this railroad camp is. We're not quite sure, but talked with some folks from Highland College, because we also worked with them on some survey work for some other additional signing we're going to put up grading camp going towards Herman Gulch. And we have found some of the old platforms for tents and some, you know, old shoe buttons or buckles and such like that. So not quite sure where it's at, but someday we'll be able to figure it out.
Jocelyn? I might have missed it, but when were the tunnels constructed?
In 1906, so the railroad came online in 1909, and it was starting to be built. They were starting to survey it through. It was also, there was additional lining that was added later on.
Oh, okay,
But the initial tunnels were done in 1905.
that's why I asked, because I see in some of the tunnels it says 1941.
And that's where they
Yeah.
were.
Okay, they were just lined.
They were just lined at that
Okay.
point.
Yeah.
So the other piece of unique Thompson Park is that it's part of the Yellowstone Trail. And I was reading some of the plans, and one of the plans and one of the directions for the WPA is that for that portion of the Yellowstone Trail that runs through Thompson Park, they wanted it to be oiled so that it would reduce the dust within the park. And what's unique about the Yellowstone Trail, and I don't know if anyone's heard about the Yellowstone Trail before, but it was the very first transcontinental highway that ran from Washington to Massachusetts. And the whole idea behind the transcontinental highway was to get people to start traveling in their automobiles. And so there were these guys, and I think it was in Minnesota, that decided, well, we're going to come up with this route. And they came up with the route. They came up with their emblem, which actually, if you're driving on Highway 2 coming back into Butte, there's one on a house that's on the right-hand side, somewhere right around Terra Verde and Janney Road area on that one. But it ran through Thompson Park up through Roosevelt Drive. And it talks about it, where they wanted to go. And this is the current map of how the Yellowstone Trail lies. So it is another piece that's very unique that we talk about as part of our interpretation. And last but not least, our other little claim to fame within Thompson Park is that we have the very first registered disc golf course in the country is in Thompson Park. And we named it Eagle's Nest Disc Golf Course. It's an 18-hole regulation disc golf course. And I've been working with volunteers and right now also a Eagle Scout candidate to continue rehabbing this. They started taking care of it. I had to do a lot of threats that I was going to close it because they started little fires. Somehow you still have to smoke a cigarette when you're going out golfing. And I was able to provide them with baskets and signs. My Eagle Scout project, he's building better tee boxes. We've got a little map up here, and it's amazing how many people, it's one of 3 golf courses that we have here in town. So again, if you look back at that very first comment that was made in 1915 by a city councilman that basically said Thompson Park was a gateway to Butte that commands the admiration of everyone who passes through it, we're now looking at that second generation of this park. And my dream or my hope is that it continues on and we can continue building on it. I'd like to be able to continue adding in some adjacent trails. You know, there's lots of things that can still be done. And one of the most important pieces that makes this work is that the Forest Service and Butte-Silver Bow made a commitment in 2007 that they would manage this together, understanding that neither agency has the ability to do it on their own, but through the partnership, we each have our own sets of skills that we can use to be able to maintain it. I manage the campground host that is up there. Butte-Silver Bow provides me the stipend that pays the host. I manage and hire the host. I manage all of the volunteers who work on the trail maintenance, the AmeriCorps, anything else that goes on in there. We work with Butte-Silver Bow on the blading of the roads that are in there. Butte-Silver Bow also maintains the entrance areas so that in the wintertime you're able to park there. It's now much more of a full-time, year-round facility. We probably won't open the gates in the winter, primarily because, like Sheep's Head, when you're able to close those gates at night and at the end of the season, the amount of vandalism is dramatically reduced. And it offers a separate opportunity in the wintertime. We now have a partnership between some of the members of Highland Cycling and the Mile High Nordic Ski Education Foundation, that they are grooming the trails and some of the roadways in there for fat tire biking, which makes it great for cross-country skiing and snowshoeing. And we're going to be working with Parks and Recreation to start maybe doing some winter little classes and adventure trips in there. So there's a lot to look forward to. I think there's a lot that we can be proud of. We have become this mecca for recreation, and people come to Butte specifically to come to Thompson Park, to ride the park trails, as well as make the connections into Continental Divide trail system from the park area. So I kind of say that, you know, we're kind of becoming this Moab of Montana for our trails. Butte is getting to be known for its trails, and a lot is due to the opportunity and the vision that actually Judy Jacobson had in wanting us to be able to rehabilitate Thompson Park and bring back this legacy that William Boyce Thompson had so many years ago. And so I pass this legacy on to you all as well.